I have to constantly remind myself that I spent thousands of hours doing webinars. I spent tens of thousands of hours creating those webinars. I spent countless thousand hours thinking about webinars, sleeping and dreaming about webinars. How do I distill 20,000 plus hours and the total sum of my knowledge into something that you can immediately put into action and have a bottom line impact the first time that you use it? Well, here's how. We are just going to break down the formula, make it systematic, and then we remove any uncertainty or any doubt. It's kind of one of those things. Follow the formula, get the result, right? Would you like to look at and explore the ins and outs of each of these steps as we go through here? Of course. So let's talk about content. Let's break that down. Is it possible to give the best, most informative education and get 0 people to buy from you on your webinar? Is it possible that you could truly go out there and show them the best, most effective tactics and strategy related to whatever you have and get $0 and 0 cents as a result of that from your webinar? And the answer is yes, I've done it before. The first few years I started doing webinars, that was pretty much the standard operating procedure. Go out there and bare your soul to your audience. Have them tell you they love you for it, and look at that bank account and not see it move. Okay? Now, on the flip side, is it possible to give little to no valuable information at all on a webinar and close the lights out? Yeah. Unfortunately, it is. I wish the world didn't work like this, but this is reality. You can give no value and make a lot of money, or you can give a tremendous amount of education and make 0 money. We even have a term for this. It's called a pitch fest. Now, here's the breakthrough. The question you have to ask yourself, this is what really changed the tables for me, rose me from failure to success, just like that. I said, what would it take to give the most valuable possible to my audience, the most value, so that person would leave the webinar better off than they were before they first showed up? And if, and only if, it makes sense to them to show how investing in your offer would provide even more value than what they're already experiencing. So essentially it's this. You make them better, and then you show them that it can get even better still if they say yes to your offer at the end. That's the breakthrough. That's where the lens of content and education come from, because every webinar has 2 sales. Sale number 1 is the product. You can have people hate from you and buy from you. Happens all the time. No like and trust? No. People can hate you and buy from you. You can deceive, trick, and coerce somebody to give you money, and some people, that's the game that they play. I don't advise you to do it, but that's the way it is. And if you follow this process of, tricking and coercing somebody, or, being antagonistic, you can win in the short term, but you will lose in the long term if you utilize this approach. That's because there's more than one sale that occurs on the webinar. The second sale, even more important, is you, the person. After the webinar is over, would they be less or more excited to hear from you again? And the answer has to be more. That's what we have to satisfy. Tell me, does this phrase ring a bell to you, providing value? A lot of people say this, providing value, but what does it even mean? Here's my definition. I'd love to share this with you. Providing value is, to me, the ability for the attendee to learn and gain insight in a way that automatically results in a positive change in their behavior. Keyword, behavior. If they don't change their behavior as a result of being on your webinar, you have not served them. You have not, quote unquote, provided value in that situation. So if the real question then becomes, how do I create a positive change in behavior as a result of what I teach them and what I show them in the content portion of my webinar? Here's what value is on webinars. If they were scared before and now they're confident, that's value. If they had inner shame and you replaced it with inner love, that's value. If they felt hopeless and you gave them hope, that, my friend, is extreme value. That's what we have to accomplish with the content. So content done right is this. You say less, but have a greater impact. You meet them where they're at so you can take them to where they need to go. You take them from where there was no hope. Now hope exists. Because it's not just what they need to do. It's what they need to do right now and how they feel about what to do right now. One of the first people that I ever listened to that totally changed my thinking was a gentleman named Jim Rohn. And he says, it's not just what you know, it's how you feel about what you know. And I took that to heart. That is real value. And that's how we design it when we give our webinars. Here is the value providing process. 3 parts to it. First, state a clearly defined outcome. Second, create a step-by-step process for achieving it. Third, provide content, vision, strategy, and commitment for each step. So let's talk about what a defined outcome is first. Here's my defined outcome for this very webinar. To show anyone how to add webinars to their business in a way that is easy, enjoyable, and has an immediate impact on their bottom line, regardless of whether it's their first webinar or their next. So before I ever do a single slide on this webinar, I define my outcome of what I want to happen behaviorally to you, and that's where the content comes from. Now, by the way, more often than not, I recommend you share your defined outcome with your audience, because fuzzy targets don't get hit. Now, once you have your defined outcome, what do you do next? You break it down into a step-by-step process. So for me, on this webinar, it's step 1, here's what you do in the introduction. Step 2, here's what you do in the content portion. Step 3, in the transition. And step 4, in the pitch section. So we define the outcome. We break it down in the step-by-step process. What's left? There's only one thing left, and that's provide content's vision and commitment and strategy for each of these steps. So for example, step 1 on our webinar here today is the introduction. My context I gave you for this is you only get one chance to make a first impression. That's why it's important, right? The vision that I painted for you of what a great introduction looks like, right here. I accomplished this, right? I said it seizes the attention. It communicates something special about to happen. Strategy. What did I give for strategy? I showed you 5 components of an introduction, and then we broke down one component specifically through authority. Commitment. I asked you questions like, do you think this increases the number of people who show up to your webinars? Do you also think that it makes them more committed from the get-go? And will that lead to more sales? I even point blank asked you, do you feel like if you don't help somebody, and you could, aren't you actively participating in their despair? That is commitment. We're getting you to commit to a new idea. This is what you do for each of the steps in your webinar process. For each step, you repeat this. Context, that should say. Pardon me that little typo there. Context, vision, strategy, commitment. So if I have 4 steps, I have 4 times I provide content, a little bit of content for each step, the vision for each step, the strategy for each step, sorry, the context again, it's messing me up, right? And then the commitment, making sure people are on board with you. And this is all you have to do in your content section. The content section is the easiest section of all when it comes to webinars. A lot of people think it's the hardest, not when you have a formula for it. And you say, Jason, can you use this over and over again? Yes! I've used this formula for 60 different webinars that have been successful, but it's the same exact formula. Just for each topic, the details vary a little bit. Now, what are some additional best practices? You don't have to follow any of these, by the way. Just do what I just taught you. But these are some easy wins that you can provide to yourself when you create your next webinar. First one is provide your audience with a roadmap. How do you know where to go if you can't see it? Everything needs to know this is what came before it and this is what came after it. You provide that service for your audience. It makes what you're teaching infinitely more impactful. Also, do a check on emotion. When you're teaching something, you say, hey, what emotional state am I creating? Because the state of emotion is far more important than the actual thing that you're teaching. And then over time, improve your webinar. A webinar is a malleable thing that can continually be optimized. So the first time we did this webinar, it did 1.7 million in billable sales. The second time we did this webinar, less than a year later, it did 2.6 million in billable sales. I actually did over 3 million when it was all said and done. Would you agree that not only will this help your content have impact, but isn't it easier to create content when you can do so within a framework? It's easier and it's better. It's easier and it's more effective. Question: when presented with a better and easier way, do you keep doing what you've been doing or do you change your approach? This is my commitment that I'm asking you. Do you go to the old way or do you say, I'm going to adopt this new way and start thinking in terms of this new way? And the answer is you better if you want to survive, right? So far we've discussed introduction and content within this framework. Now, by the way, Mike just sent me this as a text message. He says, 22%, your framework is kick-ass, brother. And we're only halfway through it. Imagine that. We got the other half to cover.